Hello students, this is Dr. M. Naglakshmi. In this lecture, we are going to see irony as a principle of structure by Cleanth groups. Let us see the biography of Cleanth groups. Cleanth groups 1906 to 1994, the period of Cleanth groups. Cleanth Brooks was born in Murray, Kentucky, and he studied at Vanderbilt University, and he was a student of Ransom, Tulane University, and is a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford University. He was a leading member of the Fugitives, also called the Southern Agrarians. The Southern Review, edited from 1935 to 1942 by Brooks and Robert Penwarren, poet and a critic, right? Was the principal critical organ of this group. He was a professor of English at Louisiana State University and later at Yale. From 1964 to 1966, he was cultural anarchy at the American Embassy in London. And his best known works is a collection of critical essays. The Well-Read Earn, 1947, Studies in the Structure of Poetry, an earlier book, Modern Poetry and the Tradition, in 1939, presented as a revised history of English poetry. It resembles a re-evaluation by F.R. Lewis in emphasizing the tradition of wit in 17th century English poetry. Brooks has written with a distinction on fiction also. William Faulkner, the Yoknapatwa Country, 1963, is the best of his later work. So, Understanding Poetry, 1938, edited in collaboration with Robert Penwarren, right? Understanding Poetry. The work, A Critical Anthology, contains some of the best practical criticism of individual poems that the new critics have produced, along with Understanding Fiction, written in 1943. It introduced their methodology to a whole generation of American students of literature. Okay, literary criticism, a short history uh, in 1957 was written in collaboration with W.K. Wimsatt. It has become indispensable to students as a concise guide to literary criticism in the West from the beginnings to the 1950s. Okay. So let us see the essay Irony as a Principle of a Structure. In this, Brooks published an article, Irony and Ironic Poetry, okay, in 1948. And later, Irony as a Principle of Structure is an expanded version published in 1951. So, initially, it was published as Irony and Ironic Poetry in 1948. And the revision or expanded version of this Irony as a Principle of Structure published in 1951. By then, the new critical methods had found acceptance. Okay, so this article is representative of his approach. What is his approach? Like Lewis, Brooks never indulges in generalities, but works only through concrete examples. Right. So his theoretical essays are full of perceptive, close readings of a variety of texts, though his partiality for metaphysical poetry is obvious. Okay, that is different. So we have already seen four kinds of meaning IAHs. New critics always believe that close reading, right? And they try to find the meaning within the text. That is the main intention, core concept of new critics, right? Brooks begins his essay on irony by laying stress on the importance of metaphor. So he argues that meanings of universal significance, which literature encodes in text, are suggested through the device of irony, which the poet shows in the structure of a poem. So he says that poet can reach universal only through the particular. We cannot, say that. universal meaning through particular meaning. We have to expand the universal meaning through particular meaning. We can say Robert Frost, Mending Walls is a perfect example for this. He talks about boundaries of nations through the boundaries of houses, right? How the good fences make good friends. That particular lines meant for two neighbors, but actually that same concept can be uh, represented by two nations, right? So a poet can deal with the universal only through the particular. Right. So the poet does not first discover an abstract theme and then embellish it with concrete details. On the contrary, he first establishes the details and from there come to the general meaning. The meaning must come from the particulars. This is what, when you read the Robert Frost poem, you should understand how the particular meaning of two people, the two neighbors, the same concept can be applicable to two different nations, universal theme, right? Beautiful example can be fit for this. Okay. So, Brooks uses an example here. Here, it is the tail that wags the talk. It is better to call the tail of the kite, right? It gives a stability and direction. The long tail of the kite, though it adds to the weight of the kite, gives its stability and direction. He compares the kite to the universal meaning and the tail to the particular details which weight it down. Just as the kite's flight would be without direction without the tail. So the poet can say things only through metaphor. Direct statements leads to abstraction and takes us out of poetry altogether. So when we say everything directly, then which means that it doesn't look like a poem. It sometimes it takes us away from the poem altogether. That is what he meant. So a poem is not a collection of poetic images. The elements of poem are related to each other, are not as blossoms juxtaposed in a bouquet, but as the blossoms related to a growing plant. The beauty of the poem is the flowering of the whole plant and needs the stalk, the leaf, and the hidden roots. So, the statements and images in the poem are in an organic relationship. Right? It is a principle of interaction, right? With one part qualifying and adding meaning to the other, right? The elements in the poem are the different parts of a plant. So, how the one part qualifies the other part and adding meaning to the other part. Like in a plant, that each uh, element has uh, its own duties, its own responsibility, its own respective flavor, right? For example, the elements in a poem are the different parts of a plant. The elements are not separate beautiful things like the flower in a bouquet. Right? You can make a bouquet by placing together different beautiful flowers side by side. But a finished poem is the flower itself, right? Produced by the interaction of different elements. So, in a bouquet, you have different flowers together, put it together. But a finished poem is each different flower. Each different flower has its own plant, its own leaf, its own hidden roots, all those things, right? So, uh, from particular to universal, right? Another simile he uses is that of drama. The poem is like a drama. In a drama, an utterance gets meaning, right? The total effect of drama is the result of the combination of the different elements in it, the different characters, lines, dramatic movements on the stage, etc. Just as there are no superfluous actors in a good play, a good poem has no unnecessary lines. So, in a good play, தேவையில்லாத எதுவுமே இருக்கக்கூடாது. தேவையில்லாத ஆக்டர்ஸோ தேவையில்லாத நடிப்போ இருக்கக்கூடாது. அதுதான் ஒரு நல்ல பிளேக்கு அடையாளம். அதே மாதிரிதான் ஒரு நல்ல போயம்க்கு unnecessary லைன்ஸ் எதுவுமே இருக்கக்கூடாது. அதுதான் ஒரு நல்ல போயம். So connotations are more important. நம்ம இப்பதான் வந்துட்டு 4 kinds of meaningல பார்த்தோம். Connotations are important in poetry. They enter into the structure of the poem. Any statement made in the poem bears the pressure of the context. Its meaning is modified by the context. In other words, the statements made are to be read as speeches made in a drama. Their relevance, their propriety, their rhetorical force, even their meaning cannot be divorced from the context in which they are embedded. So, context is the most important thing in determining the meaning. That is what we have seen in 4 kinds of meaning, right? How the words get different meanings according to the context. The same word can get multiple layers of meaning, multiple flavors of meaning, depends upon the context, right? So when we take a close look at the memorable lines of verse, we realize that they draw their poetic quality from the context. So he has given examples, right? He refers to Shakespeare's "Rightness is all" and King Lear, right? These famous lines from the play King Lear get their full meaning only when we read them in the context of the play. நம்ம வந்துட்டு அந்த அந்த லைனுக்கான மீனிங்க அந்த கான்டெக்ஸ்டோட பொருத்தி பாக்குறப்பதான் we understand the fullest of the meaning, right? It is an expression of the wisdom Lear acquires through suffering. So through the whole play, அவருக்கு எப்படி அந்த wisdom வந்துட்டு கிடைக்குது அப்படின்றதோட மீனிங் தான் அது. ரைட்னஸ் இஸ் ஆல் அப்படின்றது. And he takes another example from the same play, the line never, 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 never. The repetition of 5 times the same word to show how context can load even ordinary phrases with meaning. அதாவது நெவர்ங்கிறதுக்கு பெரிய ஒரு புதுசா ஒரு மீனிங் வந்துட போறது இல்ல. ஆனா இது 5 டைம்ஸ் ரிப்பீட் பண்றதுனால அதுக்கு அது எவ்வளவு ஒரு லோடு டிஃபரெண்ட் லோடு எடுக்குது. அந்த அந்த வேர்டு ரிப்பிட்டேஷன்னால எவ்வளவு ஒரு லோடு அதுக்கு இன்டென்ஸ் மீனிங் எடுக்குதுன்றதுதான் அவர் சொல்றாரு. So he generalizes and declares that the part is always modified by the pressure of the context. அந்த கான்டெக்ஸ்டோட ப்ரெஷருக்கு தகுந்த மாதிரி இந்த சின்ன வார்த்தை இவ்வளவு வாட்டி ரிப்பீட் ஆகுறப்போ அதுக்கு டிஃப்ரெண்ட் ஃபிளேவர் கிடைக்குது. So in the ordinary sense of the word, we refer to the statement as ironical when it is obviously modified by the context. So he simple sarcasm நம்ம சொல்றோம் நம்மளோட லைஃப்ல சாதாரணமா யூஸ் பண்றது. நல்லா இருக்கான்னு கேட்டா நல்லா இருக்குன்னு சொல்றது, நல்லா இருக்கு அப்படின்னு சொல்றது. So that sarcasm gives a different flavor. நல்லா இருக்கு அப்படின்றதுக்கும் நல்லா இருக்குன்னு சொல்ற அந்த இதுக்கும் உள்ள meaning totally different, right? That sarcasm, different flavor. So different flavor என்னன்னா completely opposite meaning. நல்லா இருக்குன்னு சொல்றதுக்கும் நல்லா இருக்குன்னு சொல்றதுக்கும் the words are the same, but the tone, the intensity, the flavor is completely different. One is positive, the other one is completely opposite of that thing, right? Negative. So, but irony can take forms other than sarcasm. இது வந்துட்டு sarcasm மாத்திரம் இல்ல, other forms கூட இருக்கும். So for that he has given some other examples. Elegy written in a country churchyard, and then Dover Beach, right? Elegy written in a country churchyard, rhetorical questions in the sense that answer வந்துட்டு ரொம்ப ஆப்வியஸா தெரியும் instead of stating it, right? அத வந்துட்டு ஆன்சர் தெரியற மாதிரி இருக்கிற கொஸ்டின் தான் நம்ம சொல்றோம். Conventionally recognized form. Irony has a wide variety, such as tragic irony, self-irony, playful irony, mocking irony, or gentle irony. So, when he says that, these are the examples. He feels that there can be no statement which does not employ irony if we use irony to mean the modifying force of the context. என்னன்னா சயின்ஸ்ல இல்ல மேத்தமேட்டிக்ஸ்ல தான் நமக்கு வந்துட்டு வேற ஒன்னும் அது வேற அதர் மீனிங்ஸ் இருக்காது. நம்ம வந்துட்டு 4 kinds of மீனிங்ல பார்த்த மாதிரி சென்ஸ் 2 plus 2 equals 4 அப்படின்றதோ இல்ல பைத்தாகரஸ் தியரமோ இதுக்கு வேற ஒன்னும் புது கான்டெக்ட்ல ஃபிக்ஸ் பண்றதுனால புதுசா மீனிங் மாற போறது இல்லை. எப்ப படிச்சாலும் அது ஒரே தான். பிகாஸ் தே ஆர் ட்ரூ நோ மேட்டர் வேர் தே அக்கர். ரைட்? அதெல்லாம் ட்ரூ. அது எந்த இடத்துல இருந்தாலும் அதுக்கு அதே மாதிரியான அர்த்தம் தான். Whereas statements are abstract, they possess only denotations. But connotations and multiple meanings are important in poetry. So, connotations are very, very important, and multiple meanings in poem is very, very important. That is what he has already mentioned, that I.A. Richards already mentioned in his essay, multiple readings, right? Multiple readings give multiple layers of meanings, right? So, what he declares, Brooke, what he declares, poems never contain abstract statements, right? Poem never contain abstract statements. So, any statements made in a poem should be read as if it were a speech in a drama. The context is all important. So, ஒரு 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 ஸ்டேட்மெண்ட் ஒரு போம்ல இருக்கு அப்படின்னு சொன்னா இந்த டிராமாக்கு எப்படி வந்துட்டு அந்த கான்டெக்ட் எவ்வளோ இம்பார்ட்டன்ட்டோ சிமிலர் திங் ஹியர் ஒரு ஒரு ஸ்பீச் ஒரு டிராமால இருக்கிறப்போ அந்த கான்டெக்ட் எவ்வளோ இம்பார்ட்டன்ட்டோ சிமிலர் போயட்ரியும் ரொம்ப ரொம்ப இம்பார்ட்டன்ட். The importance of the context is very important aspect of poetry, right? So, Brooks presents an analysis of Matthew Arnold's poem here, Dover Beach, to show how the poetic truth of the statement should be considered only in terms of the context, right? Who the dramatic speaker is, whom he is addressing, and the circumstances in which he makes the statement, right? Whether the statements grows properly out of a context. So, the best poems are ironical in the sense that they are able to fuse the discordant elements in them. The approach Richard's poetry of synthesis. The stability of such poems is like the stability of an arc. In architecture, the very force of gravity which pulls stones to the ground is used to support the stones in an arc. The structure of the ironical poem is one of the thrust and counter thrust. Brooke analyzes many poems to illustrate his view. So, his well-known poems like Marvels to his coy mistress, okay, and Marlowe's famous Come Live With Me and Be My Love, contain obvious ironies. So, according to him, even simple poems like the Elizabethan lyric have this structure and make full use of irony. Okay. So, according to him, all good poems contain ironic complexity. Okay, so Brooks points out that spontaneous applies to the way he may have composed his poems. Such a theory should not be allowed to intrude into our reading of the poem. A theory as to how a poem is written is being allowed to dictate to us how the poem is to be read. So his objections tie up with what has come to be known as intentional fallacy, right? So, a theory as to how a poem is written is being allowed to dictate to us how the poem is to be read. So, this is the theory by Cleanth. So, irony taken as the acknowledgement of the pressures of context is we found in every period and even in simple lyrical poetry. So irony is especially important in the modern age. So when the public has been corrupted by Hollywood films and pulp fiction, he takes up a poem uh, and to prove that how the context is important, showing examples from play Shakespeare's King Lear, right? So proof goes back to the metaphor of the kite, and he started with the essay like a kite skillfully controlled rises up against the thrust of the wind. So irony is the base, right? That is the base, to prove that work is universally acknowledged. Irony as a principle of structure. Okay, irony as the principle of structure. Okay, thank you guys. So this is the short summary of the essay, irony as a principle of structure.